Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2024 Evening with the Minister on the importance of stronger nature laws. My name's Kirsty Bevan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Conservation Council of South Australia, and I'm joining you from Ghanaland of the Adelaide Plains. I'll be your MC for this evening. Our event tonight is being live streamed and recorded, and we're joined by sign language interpreters, Kylie Clear and David McQuiggan from Deaf Connect. Both Kylie and David will remain on screen tonight during the various topics for everyone to see. We're all dialing into this webinar from far and wide, all the way across Australia. But as our Zoom link originated in Brisbane on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people, we would like to take a moment to play a short welcome to country from Shania to Mason. Shania is a descendant of the traditional owners of the Meanjin Brisbane of the northern and southern regions of the Brisbane River. And she recently recorded this welcome to country for all of us here tonight.
Nangoba Boka, Nangabarja, Yagara. Hi, my name is Shania, and I'm a descendant here in Brisbane of the traditional owners on the northern and the southern regions of the Brisbane River. I would like to extend a warm welcome today from where you are joining us today here for Queensland Conservation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and especially to anyone who is involved in taking care of the land and nature. Could we also please have a moment silent for everything that has gone on with history and Indigenous people with the land, and pay our respects. Thank you. Where we are joined here today, we are in Kurupa, which is the western part of Brisbane on the southern side of the river. And here we're in Kurupa, a lot of the women and children actually used to camp, hunt, gather and camp also in these areas. And we would have a lot of water supply, food and natural resources that we would live in these areas. The men would actually live outer areas, and the women would actually just be in these areas and they would do their traditional practices. I'd also like to extend a big acknowledgement to our river here. In our language, we say the Worrell. Could everybody say the Worrell? The Worrell, thank you. So the Worrell here in Brisbane, it actually extends all the way up to Ipswich, which is actually also our borderline areas. And then that flows all the way back into Brisbane, and then it actually goes all the way out to the ocean. So the river here is very important for our people, with our history and with our culture. It has very significant meaning, and our people actually used to hunt and fish and travel across this river, especially in this Kurupa part along this river. So thank you. Nangoba Boka, Nangabarja, and welcome to where we are. Also, I'd like to extend a big acknowledgement to Queensland Conservation today. And I'd also like to let everyone know that you guys can research any history over the last 200 years in Brisbane and see how the landscape and natural resources actually have changed. So thank you and enjoy your time.
Thank you, Shania, for your very warm welcome. You know, I'm just continuously grateful for the generosity of our First Nations people. We're so lucky. And it's exciting to see thousands of people joining us tonight from right across Australia. In fact, it'd be really awesome if we could take a moment to see where everyone's calling in from. So to do that, we're actually using an interactive tool within Zoom called Slido. We're going to launch the first poll, and you should get a notification on your screen. If you can accept it, this will allow you to contribute to a word cloud, showing which country you're joining from tonight. We're going to use this Slido throughout the night for all our other questions as well. You can switch between Slido and the chat function using the buttons on the bottom of your Zoom. But if you get lost somehow, you can access it using the app button down the bottom, which will allow you to select Slido and get back into the voting options throughout the evening. Beautiful. Other housekeeping points. Oh, actually, look at that. There's amazing stuff coming through already. Some quick housekeeping points for you tonight is when you've got any questions or commentary you'd like to put through the chat, please use that chat function. It's really important for us to hear what you've got to say, but we do ask that you remain really respectful in your conversations, keep concise and on topic. We're going to endeavour to stay on time, but there's a lot to talk about. And I know we've all spent decades in this space and have a lot to say. I may have to remind speakers just to speed along if time gets a bit close. So just bear with me as we go. Look, it's great. I'm even seeing a lot of South Australians coming online tonight. That's fantastic. Well done, everybody. And this is clearly an issue that just covers the whole of Australia. And it's really encouraging to see so many people joining us from right across Australia. Well done. So tonight we're going to hear a lot about nature positive laws and the reforms in place around the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, or the EPBC Act, as it will be referred to. I should highlight briefly that tonight's event is hosted by the conservation councils around the country. Now, each state and territory has a conservation council, which is a member-based non-government organisation who exists to represent nature and give it a voice. We're the bridge between the grassroots and government, and conservation councils have a long history of winning outcomes for nature, whether it's adding to the National Parks estate, improving management of biodiversity, our precious rivers, wetlands, or stopping destructive developments. We work hard to make sure that civil society has a voice in representing nature. And we're at a critical time for environmental management in Australia. The Minister has started the process of reforming how we manage the impacts of industry and development on the environment right across the country. And tonight is about representing and presenting those key issues and where and why they're required immediately. So tonight we're going to hear from people from all over Australia on the issues that they've been working on around the country through a compilation of videos. We're then going to open the evening with Rachel Perkins from the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance. And Rachel's going to talk to us about the importance of protecting cultural heritage and how this relates to nature law reform. We're then going to focus on three key issues: renewables, climate, and threatened species. We're going to ask Minister Plibersek a question on each of these issues, and this is where you'll have an opportunity to interact. So you can use that Slido option to vote on the questions that you'd most like to be asked using that function. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the Minister. Tanya Plibersek is the National Minister for the Environment and Water. Minister Plibersek entered the Federal Parliament as the member for Sydney in 1998 and is passionate about protecting and preserving Australia's natural environments for future generations. Thank you, Minister Plibersek, for joining us tonight, and we invite you to say a few introductory remarks.
Thank you so much. This is such a wonderful opportunity to talk to and hear from people from across the country. And I wanted to thank you for the welcome to country that we received from I think your meeting on in Brisbane at the moment. I'm obviously in Sydney. I'm on Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to elders here of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And of course, we've got people from all over Australia, and I know everybody would certainly join me in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that they're on. I know that there's going to be quite a few questions about some broader environmental issues through the course of the evening, but I did want to just give people a super quick update on where we are on the environmental law reform. As you all know, The first stage of that law reform passed through the Parliament at the end of last year, and we've got the expanded water trigger to make sure that all types of unconventional gas are covered by that water trigger that protects our water resources. We've also established the nature repair market in that first lot of environmental law reforms. I just wanted to run you very quickly through where we are on the second stage of environmental law reform. They've passed through the House of Representatives. There's been a Senate inquiry, and I thank those of you who made a submission to that Senate inquiry. We're likely to get the results of that inquiry, I think, around the 19th of August, and then, of course, we'll be introducing the legislation into the Senate. For those of you who haven't been following this very closely, the second stage of law reform does a number of really important things. It's the first time in Australian history that we will have an independent environment protection agency in Australia. That's something that the environmental movement has been campaigning on for many decades. So congratulations to those of you who've been involved in that campaign. This is a really substantial step forward. The head of that EPA will be an independent statutory position like the Australian Federal Police Commissioner, so someone that can't have their work of enforcement interfered with by the government of the day. The EPA will be able to issue stop work orders, so where we think there's an imminent threat, the EPA will be able to address that imminent threat and make sure that businesses are compliant with any conditions. They'll be able to audit businesses during the course of projects that are underway. Penalties will be very substantially increased. The penalties at the moment, like the worst penalty, the highest penalty is less than $15 million. We're increasing penalties to $780 million to bring penalties for breaches of environmental law in line with things like insider trading and serious financial crimes, rather than, you know, treating them like just the cost of doing business. The auditing of offsets is a really important area of work. We've put an extra $16 million into this right now because when I became a minister, I started an audit of offsets used for projects, and we found so many of them, about 1 in 7, had not done what they promised to do. So we've taken 21 compliance actions since doing that audit, and I've secured ongoing funding to set up a compliance unit within the department at the moment to look at offsets, but obviously that's work that we would like the EPA to be doing when it's established, but we've got a dedicated team now for the first time ever, and the EPA will be doing compliance on laws around recycling, hazardous waste, wildlife trafficking, sea dumping, ozone protection and air quality. We're also in this second tranche of laws wanting to establish Environment Information Australia. This is really important. We need this data, we need this transparency. It'll do things like, instead of publishing the State of the Environment report every 5 years, it will go to reporting every 2 years, and more importantly, that reporting will automatically become public, and there'll be ongoing data on how we're tracking against our environmental goals. So most of you know that the Australian government signed up to the Kunming Montreal biodiversity framework. We've set a goal of getting to 30% of our land, 30% of our oceans, waters protected by 2030, no new extinctions and so on. Environment Information Australia will independently have transparent data about how we're tracking against all of those national objectives we've set. And I think what's really important about that is that basically the last government hid the State of the Environment report. The way we're setting up Environment Information Australia, that won't be able to happen in the future. That data will be publicly reported, and the Environment Information Australia chief will also be an independent statutory office holder, so they can't have their work interfered with.
I might just seek to hold you there, Minister, and I know that's a lot of reform that's already taken place, and it's wonderful to hear from you, and I'm sorry to cut you off. But there's a lot to say on this topic, and we've only got you for a short period of time. So while we really do want to, there will be other opportunities for you to respond to some of the questions from those community voices and some of the talks that we go through tonight. So I thank you for your patience as we move through things. And we do really very much appreciate that you've taken the time to join us tonight. So to kick off, we have gathered some videos of local voices from across the country speaking about the places they love and why stronger nature laws are so important to them. Now, we didn't have time to capture everybody's voice across the whole of Australia, but we are keen to share this compilation with you now, so please enjoy.
It would personally hurt me to not see the Maugean skate, the swift parrot, the Tasmanian devil, the tawny frogmouth.
Remember the Tasmanian tiger? Let's not make that mistake again.
Tanya, please strengthen the environmental laws to save and protect our beautiful wildlife.
Help us protect the wildlife in our little island we call home.
My name's Joe Fontaine. I'm at Murdoch University in Perth. I've been studying fire and climate change effects on the vegetation and finding management solutions for 16 years here in WA. What we've been seeing here is a microcosm of what's coming down the pipe for the rest of the country. Longer dries, hotter hots, and we need to build in resilience to our policy and legislative frameworks for biodiversity protection if we hope to be resilient to these sorts of climate change effects in the future.
Hi, I'm Tanya. I'm the Great Barrier Reef Community Campaigner with the Australian Marine Conservation Society. But I've also been working on the Great Barrier Reef as a scuba diving instructor and reef guide for the past 12 years, so I've seen the impacts on the reef firsthand. Climate change is the biggest threat to our reef, and we need to rapidly move away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. The Great Barrier Reef is also threatened by overfishing and creeping industrialisation. The clearing of vegetation in reef catchments causes erosion and increased sedimentation, flowing into the rivers and creeks that lead to the waters of the Great Barrier Reef. So nature and our reef urgently needs strong national nature laws to ensure these threats can be properly addressed and considered as a whole for their impacts on this amazing World Heritage listed site.
My name is Monique. I am the community organiser at the Cairns and Far North Environment Centre up here in Far North Queensland, where our communities and ecosystems are still recovering from the devastating flooding that followed Cyclone Jasper last year. We're on the front lines of climate change, and we need an urgent transition away from coal and gas to protect our unique ecosystems and mitigate the worst of the impacts of climate change. But as we see the continued rollout of large-scale renewables, our communities are really concerned about proposals that are poorly planned and come at a cost to people and nature. But we know this doesn't have to be the case. We can have an energy transition that benefits our communities and the environment, but that starts with fixing our nature and planning laws.
Our bulldozer pulled the chain right up to the corner, another one turn, and come straight up to the river near the road. And they turn, and back again. And they turn, and back again, and meet the clear. And they was doing back and forth, day and night. He's doing all the knocking on the tree now. This is my life. The tree is my life. The family tree. The soil is my soul. Our spirit make us sick because we don't look after my country. I want to stop, don't do that. Wouldn't like this blue sky, wouldn't no tree. No, we need a tree with a wildlife, kangaroo,
We're here standing in Double Duke State Forest in a remnant tree, what should have once was an ocean of really iconic habitat for threatened species, including the southern greater glider, which was here. So please urgently protect our nature laws.
Hi, my name is Adina Khan, and I live in West Gippsland.
a small location in Victoria. I love Gippsland for the quiet area and beautiful scenery, but I don't think it will be known for any beautiful scenery much longer. It'll be known for the biggest radiated lake in Australia. This here is the Latrobe Valley Mine. It is located in Latrobe Valley, just 20 minutes away from my home. It is not looking good for us. As you see, the greenhouse gases being emitted are dangerous. You probably know that though. The power station has been proposed to shut down in the next couple of years. Now they have started filling up the mine with water coming from lakes along the area. I would like to ask about placing laws to protect the lakes, not just me, but everyone.
I'm Miriam Yip. I'm with the St Kilda Mangroves Alliance here in Adelaide's north. Around me are what remains of some of St Kilda's mangroves and samphire, which has suffered at the hands of questionable management and compliance at a neighbouring salt field. Tough, impactful and enforced nature protection laws just might have prevented the death of 24 hectares of vegetation at this site since 2020. This area is special to South Australians. It lies within the Adelaide International Bird Sanctuary and the Adelaide Dolphin Sanctuary. In the waters behind me is a nursery for marine fish and crustaceans. If dead, these mangroves and the samphire can't capture carbon. For too long, forgiveness has been easier to get than permission. This country must have solid nature protection laws enforced by a watchdog with teeth.
Wow. So many mixed emotions. But still, I'm just amazed at how much hope and possibility that people working in this field for decades still have. Incredibly powerful stories. I'm certain we're going to be able to dig a little bit deeper on many of these issues throughout the evening, but first, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Rachel Perkins, the Executive Director of First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance. Rachel's a Arende and Kalkanoon woman from Alice Springs. Her body of work as a screenwriter, producer, director, board member and festival director embodies her passion and skill in bringing Indigenous stories to the screen worldwide. Rachel's Aboriginal heritage has informed her entire career, from filmmaking to her position today as Director of Culture Heritage for the National Native Title Council and First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance. Rachel, welcome, and I'm sorry if my pronunciations weren't perfect. I did practice them several times over, but you know, I get tripped up, so my apologies.
No problem. Thanks for the acknowledgement, and thanks very much for giving us the space to be here and talk with you all. I'm coming from my people's country, Aranda country, here in Mbantua, Alice Springs, and I'll talk briefly about who I work for. I'm very proud to be employed by the National Native Title Council, which is a body representing native title, people with native title aspirations and people who hold native title across the country. But the secretariat of a bigger organisation, an alliance called the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance, I work primarily for them. And the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance is a alliance of traditional owner organisations, so land councils, all the land councils in the Northern Territory, the Kimberley Land Council, Cape York Land Council, also the Torres Strait Islander Native Title Representative Body, South Australian Native Title Services, Queensland South Native Title Services, including membership from Tasmania, from the Tasmanian Aboriginal Land Council. So we have representation in New South Wales as well from the New South Wales Native Title Service. So we go coast to coast across the continent, and we are representing the interests of traditional owners who are concerned with the reform that's happening both with the EPBC Act and also the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act, call it ATSIPA. So we are engaged in both those reforms. It's heartening to see so many people online tonight and so much work that's being done to preserve and care for this land and waters that we all share. We take very seriously the role of Indigenous people as custodians of country with an obligation to care for country. And so we are very enthusiastically supporting the reform in this area, particularly the reform around the Indigenous engagement standard. So Some of you who will have read the Samuels review that was done into the EPBC Act, one of his key recommendations was that proponents engage with Indigenous people early in the process of development for a number of reasons, basically respect, but also so they can integrate Indigenous knowledge into the planning early. That at the moment, a lot of proponents come to us at the end of the process when there's a lot of money expended, stakes are very high, and they come to us and they seek approvals to do development on our country, and we're the last people to be spoken to. So the engagement standard has not yet been released, but we feel very strongly that it should be supported as a foundational aspect of this legislative reform. I wanted to also briefly talk to you about the heritage component of the reform that's going through at the moment, the ATSIPA Act, because of course our heritage is embedded in our country and waters across the continent. And the existing act we know is broken. It was introduced in 1984 as a stopgap measure. But unfortunately, for the 620 or so applications that have been made by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to protect their culture, only 12 have been successful. So I think that's a very important statistic to keep in mind. We know the system is broken, and so we have been working closely with the previous government, the coalition government, and now the Labor government to reform this act. And of course, the world's attention was brought to the fact that Aboriginal and cultural heritage is being destroyed legally by the destruction of Juukan Gorge. And that has given us the impetus to look at states and territory legislation, but also the Commonwealth legislation. So we've been in the process of doing that for 3 years. We have a positive relationship with government at present, and we hope to move towards legislating in the not too distant future. So I would ask that you keep in touch with us on this aspect of reform. It may be that we need to come to you for your support for this important reform at some stage. And, you know, obviously there's such a track record of Indigenous interests being ignored in the process of development, and what Indigenous people are saying very much is that we want a seat at the table and we want our voices to be heard. And we think that reforming the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act will make that happen. So we're very committed to the reform process. And given we haven't got much time, I might stop there.
That's over to you, Minister. If you've got some initial thoughts, we're getting a lot of feedback on the chats that everybody's really keen to hear from you. And we do really want to offer you a space to give us your opinion, your talk. But if you've got any commentary or feedback or anything you'd like to say in regards to what Rachel's brought up tonight.
Yeah. Well, first of all, to thank Rachel and acknowledge her for the incredible amount of detailed, thoughtful work that she and other members of the First Nations Cultural Heritage Protection Alliance have done. First, as Rachel said, in response to the shocking destruction at Juukan Gorge, but as well as the reforms that we need to make to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act that you know, would have stopped such destruction. The work that the First Nations Cultural Heritage Protection Alliance have taken on to help us develop a First Nations consultation standard for the nature positive laws that will replace the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act are really important. Like in a sense, it's a no-brainer. Like early, genuine consultation with the people who speak for country will help us better protect the environment and better protect cultural heritage. But working on making sure that we are getting that standard right, so that we're identifying the right people who are speaking for country, so that we are making sure that the consultation is indeed early and genuine and reflects free, prior and informed consent that's really important and detailed work. And Rachel and her colleagues have been doing just phenomenal consultation and detailed policy design. So thanks, Rachel.
Beautiful. And thank you, Rachel. That was really a fantastic addition to tonight's discussion. And it is exciting to hear the work that's happening on cultural heritage protection, and the environment movement, I can guarantee, is committed to supporting this vital work into the months and years ahead. And thank you, Minister, for your response. The next issue we're going to address tonight is around nature and renewables, and will be presented by Natalie Frost. Natalie is the nature campaigner at the Queensland Conservation Council. Now, remember, during the next 3 speakers, that Slido function will be available to vote on the questions you'd like each of our speakers to pose to the Minister afterwards. That voting will be available to you throughout each speaker's introduction. And if you can't see the Slido, remember to click on the apps at the bottom of your Zoom. Okay, over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to be joining you here tonight. Right now, our forests and woodlands are facing unprecedented pressures, as you all know. Here in Queensland, we have the highest rate of deforestation in the country, largely cleared for pasture, and there are increasing land use pressures from housing and the renewable energy transition. This is a wicked problem in Queensland. Every wind project proposed in the state would clear threatened species habitat. We need a new approach through strong regional planning. Regional planning, which identifies areas of ecological and cultural value to protect in conservation zones, and areas suitable for development. This offers a way to navigate this land use pressure and continue moving forward at the pace that we need for climate action. Minister, you've acknowledged that we need to fix our broken environment laws and have already progressed with some key parts of the reforms needed. Thank you. You've also acknowledged that we need to build renewables quickly, and in December 2022 signed an MOU with the Queensland Government to develop 3 regional plans for Queensland. These would essentially act as pilots for the rest of the country. But we are yet to see these plans in place. Given the level of reform needed and the complexity, we know this is hard, but we know that this is urgent for nature. I've put together some questions that everyone has now hopefully voted on in the poll, and I'll just jump in straight away with the first question, as I know everyone is eager to hear from you. So the question that got the highest vote at the moment, oh, and it just changed. Okay, voting closed. This is a hot topic. Minister, will you introduce the full suite of reforms, including the National Environmental Standards, this term of government?
Yeah, well, we'll do them as soon as we can. What we've said is we've got stage 2 in the Parliament at the moment, and I was running through where we're at on stage 2. Stage 3, we've said there's 6 main outstanding areas for consultation. We're working, overtime on that work. Many of you as individuals, but more particularly as organisations, have been engaged in that consultation. And it does include things like how our environmental laws interact with our climate laws, because of course we've got the safeguard mechanism. And as you identify, Natalie, we are very keen to see a fast rollout of renewables. What does that mean, and how do our environmental laws contemplate the benefit of projects like this, as well as the risks attached to them? I'm happy with the progress that's being made on both the consultation, the policy consultations on stage 3, and the actual drafting is a really big job. The current Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, as those of you who are familiar with it, those of you who have it as bedside reading would know, runs to well over 1,000 pages. And the laws that replace the EPBC will be, I expect, of the same magnitude. So, yeah, we're doing it as quickly as we can, as quickly as we reasonably can, without compromising people's opportunity to have a say. And so we're doing things like this. This is the second one of these that I've done that's been organised by the Queensland Conservation Council, but things like this all over the country, all the time, often in person as well. We've consulted thousands of people and individual organisations. We've had online webinars. And we've committed, very importantly, to releasing an exposure draft of stage 3 reforms before they go into the Parliament, so that people will have one more opportunity to be consulted, as well as the opportunities that they've already had.
That's great, Minister, and completely understand that this is incredibly complex work. And all of the callers on here tonight are very passionate and dedicated to ensure that we do get this right. But we do also have that balance of the level of urgency as well. Yeah. Just knowing, you know, we have over 2,000 threatened species here in Australia, and it's really important that we, you know, protect those last remaining areas of habitat. We've got time for maybe one or two more questions.
Well, can I actually, Natalie, you did raise regional planning and the renewables regional planning, and I did want to say this balance between the rollout of renewables and how we continue to protect the environment is such an important one, because I know people are very concerned about the impact of climate change. The fastest thing we can do is decarbonise the economy. That means a huge transition in our electricity generation sector. We do want to see those renewable projects built, but we want to see them built in the right way, in the right places. And I have actually knocked back a wind farm in Queensland because it was proposed to be built in the wrong place. And so regional planning is a really important part of that. As you said, we are doing a regional planning process with the Queensland government that includes a zone that is specifically looking at renewables. And what we're really trying to do is say, looking across this region, these are the areas where we see a high concentration of threatened species, you know, a vulnerable ecological community. Avoid these areas. These areas, maybe they're degraded farmland, maybe they've been developed in some other way. If you meet the proper standards for the type of development that we're talking about, say it's a wind farm, you'll get a fast approval. And so that's how we hope to balance the urgency of the transition to renewables with making sure that we still have strong environmental protections. I think it is really it is important to understand that I am prepared to say no to projects that are, you know, renewable energy projects if they're in the wrong place, but also that renewable energy projects are not the only ones that we want to see as priority developments. We also want to see, for example, more housing being built. We've got a housing affordability crisis in this country, and part of that's about supply. So we're doing another project with the Queensland government, for example, on a housing regional plan, and we're looking at other states to do those as well. But that's the best way at a landscape scale of protecting the most vulnerable places and adding to nature conservation at the same time as getting those things that have a community benefit underway.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good kind of blueprint and opportunity to speed up that development, but then also protect those areas. Just a question on that then, in terms of the draft National Environmental Standard on regional planning, at the moment it talks about the conservation zones, but the conservation zones only in those areas ruled out would be stopping, you know, one kind of development, and whether that be renewable energy or housing. I guess the best case scenario would be that the conservation zones are pure conservation zones. So we don't see a regional plan.
Sorry, just to clarify, Natalie, it's not one type of development. It's a type of development that's specified, or another type of development that would have a similar impact on the environment. So it might be in a conservation zone that you don't want to build housing, but you wouldn't object to a transmission line over that large area or something. Like, I'm not going to kind of just make up examples as we go, but the conservation zones protect from a particular type of development that's being facilitated in the other area, or something that would have a similar impact on matters of national environmental significance.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying. I think that's really important for our supporters.
There's so much detail here. I'm really not surprised that people kind of, you know, miss, you know, it might be not specified on page 5, but specified on page 205. So, you know, I understand why people miss bits.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I think we are on time for this section. So thank you again, Minister. It's such a pleasure to be with you here tonight.
Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you, Natalie, and well done keeping to time. Very impressive. And thank you, Minister, because really often that clarity of language goes a long way. Now, there was a lot of chats coming through there with a whole bunch of information reminding us that, you know, there's a whole world of people doing work in terms of research. There's papers coming out about how to do this better from the Wentworth group. So yeah, really, really valuable conversation, and the chat line is really showing just how important this is to everybody. Okay, in the interest of keeping us going on time, I'm now going to hand it over to Dr. Kirsty Howie, who's the Executive Director of the Environment Centre in the Northern Territory, and James Overington, the Executive Officer with Environment Tasmania, and they're going to discuss Australia's threatened species and their ever-present risk of extinction. Now, everybody remember, you can access the Slido either through the More button or the Apps button on the bottom. If you navigate through there to Slido, hopefully you're going to be able to influence which question gets put to the Minister. But over to you, Kirsty and James.
Thank you, and good evening, Minister, and good evening, everyone. So across Australia, too many precious species are threatened with extinction. We've witnessed continual declines in some of Australia's most iconic creatures, from the intriguing ghost bat found through the vast northern savannas where I'm located, to the one-of-a-kind Maugean skate found only in Tassie's Macquarie Harbour. And to date, our federal environment law has failed to prevent these declines. In the Northern Territory where I am, broad-scale land clearing is rapidly increasing, with clearing permits now regularly approved for more than 3,000 hectares at a time. And we don't think that's happening anywhere else in the country in 2024. New research has shown that since the year 2000, on average, every one of these massive clearing events has occurred over the mapped habitat of at least 12 federally listed threatened species, but no NT pastoral land clearing has ever been referred for assessment under the EPBC Act. Australia's national environment law is failing to stop rampant unregulated land clearing. Federal laws to date haven't protected our threatened wildlife and the wild places they call home. And this obviously must change. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Kirsty, and good evening, Minister. I'm calling in from the banks of the Kanamaluka in Lutruwita, Tasmania. Minister, in 2022, you set a zero extinctions target for Australia's plants and animals. In the following year, you had the opportunity to strengthen that target by overhauling the EPBC Act. As we know, this didn't happen, and we're still waiting for the complete overhaul of the law that nature so desperately needs. In Tassie, Minister, we have a great number of species on the brink of extinction, and we're running out of time to save them. The rapid decline of the Maugean skate perfectly illustrates the failure of the EPBC Act to protect threatened species. After being declared endangered, salmon farming in the skate's last remaining refuge was allowed to increase 20-fold. The failure to properly address the multiple cumulative impacts in the harbour will likely lead to the Maugean skate becoming the next unique Australian animal driven to extinction. Minister, conservation advice under the EPBC Act has stressed that urgent action is required. Thank you. Over to you, Kirsty.
Great. So over to the questions now. And I think the winner is, for the Minister, how will you ensure the protection of critical habitat for threatened species?
Well, we've got $550 million that we're investing in threatened species and dealing with invasives, and that work takes a whole variety of forms. But of course, the changes to the environmental laws will be a really critical part of this. I made the commitment to zero new extinctions for a reason. And what we're doing with the environmental law that is designed to better protect threatened species, as well as those on-the-ground investments that I mentioned a minute ago, is actually to clearly define what are unacceptable impacts. At the moment, there's still a lot of leeway once a proposal is made and there's an assessment that its impacts are likely to be unacceptable against a matter of national environmental significance. There's still a lot of leeway for the government of the day to allow such a thing to proceed. What we're trying to do in our environmental law reform is to clearly define what's unacceptable and make it clear that the EPA, when we establish it, cannot approve something that is clearly unacceptable. I think the other thing that's really important, as well as the investment and the environmental law reform, I think protecting larger parts of Australian land and waterways and ocean completely is going to be really key for the future. We've got, so far, we've added 40 million hectares to the national estate. James is calling in from Tasmania. He's probably aware that we added an area the size of Germany to the highly protected waters around Macquarie Island, which was the largest act of conservation anywhere in the world last year, largest act of conservation anywhere in the world last year. That's really just the beginning. In that 40 million hectares, I haven't included the 12 new IPAs, the Indigenous Protected Areas, that we're in the process of working with traditional owners on formal acknowledgement and declaration of those Indigenous Protected Areas. Of course, we've got McDonald Island and Heard Island consultation open at the moment. So in addition to the 40 million hectares we've already added to the national estate, there will be tens of millions of additional hectares on top of that. And someone asked earlier, I think it was Natalie asked earlier, about how wouldn't it be better just to set some areas aside entirely for conservation? Yeah, it would. And that's why we're doing it through these additions to the national estate. And it's why we're doing things like working within the UN framework on having a system for other effective conservation measures recognised in Australia. An example of the sort of areas that we could be better protecting for nature are areas like some of the enormous defence bases. And Kirsty, you'd be aware of some of the ones in Northern Australia. And we worked on a really great project with Defence on one of the northwest defence bases, where they've been dealing with ferals and invasives on defence land in a much more proactive way than they normally would. And so you can actually return these areas that are not set aside for conservation, but can have an enormous, can make an enormous contribution to conservation if we properly manage them. So defence bases are the big bush ones are a really good example of that, but also closer to urban areas, things like water catchments. Water catchments, if they're properly managed, again, can make a really substantial contribution to nature that's close to people. But in many instances, we haven't properly managed those areas either. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do to better protect our threatened species. Kirsty, you mentioned that there's 2,000 on the list. Yeah, and we're adding them all the time. We're actually dealing right now with the backlog of threatened species from the Black Summer bushfires. Obviously, the science takes a little while to catch up with the real world impact that is causing species to become endangered or extinct. So we're just right now dealing with some of that Black Summer bushfire. And it is alarming. The number of species that have gone extinct obviously is alarming, but the number that we're adding to the threatened species list is alarming as well. The one silver lining that I point out here is the fact that it goes onto the threatened species list, or the fact that it's uplisted to a higher category, means that the protections that go along with that are then applied to that species. So it is a grim picture, but that grim picture is the tool that we are using to give higher levels of protection and to drive investment as well into threatened species. I made another announcement during the week about funding for threatened species coordinators to work on the ground on those restoration and protection actions that we know are so necessary.
Thank you,
Thanks for the
Minister.
question.
Kirsty Bevan, do I have one more question to ask from my cut?
Sorry, James.
That's
And it was
all right,
really
don't
good
worry.
to hear from the Minister there.
Thank
I mean, thank you, James, and thank you, Kirsty Howie. Like, really, it's such an important issue, and every state and territory has their projects, their areas which are already protected under existing legislation, which they're fighting tooth and nail to convince that they should be further protected. And I mean, this just points to the fact that reform is needed immediately. Those pressures are really real. We're living them every day, which brings us to our final issue we're going to discuss tonight, climate. Now, to bring this discussion to you is Jess Beckerling, who is the Executive Director of the Conservation Council of Western Australia. Voting again is now available, so do jump onto your Slido. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks so much, Kirsty, and good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. We are in the midst of the twin and compounding crises of climate change and biodiversity decline. The two are inextricably linked, and we must consider them together. We can stop agricultural runoff onto the Great Barrier Reef, and we can stop native forest logging. But if we don't stop fossil fuel emissions, we cannot protect the places that we love. In WA, after the longest, hottest, driest summer ever recorded, we've just seen a catastrophic collapse of forests. And the first time this happened in a much smaller event in 2011, Carnaby's cockatoos population crashed by 60%. We applaud the Minister's Zero Extinctions Plan and for recognising the Carnaby's as one of the key species that need to be protected. Stopping new fossil fuels and transitioning much more rapidly to renewable energy is critical to protecting the Carnaby's and so many other species and ecosystems. We're entering uncharted territory. We have now had 12 consecutive months that were at least 1.5 degrees warmer than the corresponding 1850 to 1900 monthly average. And yet, as at the end of 2023, Australia has 129 major new fossil fuel projects planned. We still have time to act, and every fraction of a degree matters. We clearly need strong nature laws that can protect our intact ecosystems and provide the right frameworks for developing a more hopeful and resilient future. I am going to move to asking some questions of the Minister. So I hope everybody has made their vote. Minister, the first question, so very close between the first and the second. Hopefully we'll be able to get to both of them, is what can governments do to push back on fossil fuel companies who are undermining climate action?
Well, I think what can we do to actually decarbonise the Australian economy? A lot. And that's why we've set a target of net zero. It's why we're working so hard to get to that target of net zero. It's why we introduced and passed the safeguard mechanism with the support of the Teals and the Greens political party and a lot of the crossbench against the opposition, obviously, of the Liberals and the Nationals. It's why we've done a whole lot of additional measures like reducing the cost of electric vehicles, introducing vehicle emission standards for the first time in 20 years. It's why we're so committed to the rollout of renewable energy. I've ticked off 55 renewable energy projects now, which is well enough to power well over 3 million homes. And that you know, still acknowledging the discussion that we had earlier about how these projects have to be the right project in the right place and not cause localised environmental problems, you know, or ignore any of the matters of national environmental significance that we're so determined to protect. But I think the next phase of the work that we're doing to decarbonise the Australian economy is actually probably the most detailed and critical part of the work that we've done to date. So those big things like $20 billion of new transmission lines to link up the renewable projects into the grid, all of that, you know, that's big, and people who follow this have heard about it. I think where the rubber really hits the road is in the decarbonisation plans that go across sectors of the economy. So there's the electricity generation decarbonisation plan, there's the transport decarbonisation plan, there's the built environment decarbonisation plan, there's the agriculture and land use one, and there's a couple of others. This is where we really get into operationalising how we move to net zero. And it is phenomenally big, interesting, complex, real world work. And those plans will be released progressively over the next few months. I think it's also worth recognising that when I talk about the renewables approvals, they're 7-to-1 compared to other types of energy projects. Like, there is a massive growth that in renewable projects and a massive transformation in the economy and in our energy market in particular that is already happening. It is difficult for that to happen. I understand why people feel like it's never fast enough. We're dealing with the cumulative impacts of generations of fossil fuel emissions and the impact that they're having right now on our environment and on the planet. And so when you care about this stuff, it can never happen quickly enough. I suppose I'd ask people to really look at the detail of the work that we're doing to decarbonise the economy, because it is happening as quickly as it's happening, probably faster than it's happening anywhere else in the world.
Mm. Yeah, and I'm aware that we're right up against time, so somebody's probably going to ask me to stop any second now. But I do want to acknowledge that there is a huge amount of work going on there, and I think everyone on the screen can see that and appreciates that. The concern that remains is that there is huge pressure from fossil fuel companies, and if that wasn't there, perhaps we'd be able to decarbonise at the speed that we need to be decarbonising at.
Jess, if it's any reassurance to you, I can tell you I respond very badly to bullying, and that nobody's going to make me make a decision that I think is the wrong decision. I don't know whether that's any comfort to you at all, but
it is a comfort, and we certainly need
I'm a very stubborn person.
All right, I know that I have to stop now, but thank you very much.
No worries.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. And thank you, Minister. Look, it's hard because there's so many texts coming through or messages coming through that chat function. And, people are emotive, they've been battling these things for such a long time. And we do appreciate the reform you're bringing and the massive amount of work that is required to get us there. So yeah, some truly sobering thoughts, but strong leadership is clearly what's required. So Minister, thank you. It's been excellent having you join us and our supporter bases here this evening. And we've had people join us from right across the country whose interests and passions and concerns are both diverse and nuanced, but it's really important for them to be able to speak and for you to listen. So thank you. And there's a lot of work still to be done to protect and conserve our environment. We're all here for that, and we have a long way to go to restore our environment to the most thriving extent that we can, which is what we all want to see. So Minister, we do have a question for you. We're seeking a commitment from you to attend another one of these online events, which are hugely valuable for our communities, and see if you're open to doing that again in the future.
Oh, I really enjoy these events, and I'm always open to it. I know it's sometimes a little hard to schedule, but I certainly love having the opportunity of talking about the huge reform agenda that we have directly with people who I really appreciate putting their time in on a night that they've probably got kids in the bath and dinner on the stove and all the rest of it. So yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for organising tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Minister. We look forward to keeping that conversation going. Cheers.
Great.
Okay, our final question for tonight is actually for our audience.
I thought that was the final question.
Oh no, for our audience now. Sorry, Minister. So we're going to share it with all of the audience here to see how important it is that you think that the Minister listens to people like us about the need to protect the environment.
Oh, hang on. I wonder what this one's going to come out as.
Yeah, hopefully no
We call that, in my
surprises.
business, we call that push polling.
And while everybody does that, and Minister, while you finish off, I'd like to really take a moment just to acknowledge how amazing it is that we're able to have so many people to join us from right across Australia. And we can really see from all of the interactions on the chat, I mean, it's been pretty full on, very emotive around, you know, native forest logging and stopping, you know, no new coal and gas. I know the pressure is on your shoulders to really act in this regard, and we're really looking to you for that strong leadership and strong enforcement and really strong nature laws. Thank you. Okay, and so before I finalise for tonight, I do want to ask everybody that's a part of this webinar, and we've got thousands of you across the country, to take action now. We can show Minister Plibersek just how crucial these reforms are right now. And we need to drive the ambition to ensure that these desperately needed reforms are actually introduced and passed during this term of government, because our wildlife can't wait. So every state and territory has a petition that you can add your name to. You can then share that petition with your 5 family or friends and get them to sign that too. We're actually looking to try and achieve 10,000 signatures and deliver a very, very powerful call to action for nature conservation to Minister Plibersek. And don't stress if you're unable to access the petition or links right now. We will send a follow-up email so that you can have those and share them with your family and friends. But that does bring us to an end. So thank you for joining us this evening. It's been really important that you're here to witness and engage with the information that we've shared tonight, and to the responses from our Federal Environment Minister, the Honourable Tanya Plibersek. It's such a diverse range of environmental concerns. And with that, I formally bring these proceedings for the 2024 Evening with the Minister to an end. I can't wait to work with all of you into the future. So take care and good night.